Hearts on the Prairie by Weston Ford. The summer heat shimmered like a mirage across the endless Texas grasslands, baking the earth in waves of golden light. Elizabeth Sinclair watched the horizon from the porch of her family's modest ranch house, her delicate fingers gripping a tin cup of lemonade. Sweat beaded along her hairline, dampening the soft wisps of auburn hair that had escaped her carefully pinned braid. She'd been watching for the cattle drive to return for days now. Her brother Thomas was leading the herd, accompanied by several ranch hands, including a man she'd heard whispers about, a quiet cowboy named Samuel Reynolds. Elizabeth's story began far from these wide-open plains. Born in Boston to a family of modest means, she had grown up with expectations of a proper Eastern life, delicate social calls, embroidery, and eventual marriage to a suitable gentleman. But Elizabeth had always been different. While other young women dreamed of fine ballrooms and elaborate parties, she found herself drawn to stories of the West, tales of wide-open spaces, frontier life, and untamed landscapes. Her parents hadn't understood her restlessness. Her mother, Charlotte Sinclair, came from old Massachusetts money, her lineage traced back to early colonial settlers. She had meticulously planned Elizabeth's future, selecting potential suitors and preparing her for a life of social refinement. But Elizabeth's heart yearned for something more, something wilder and more authentic. When her uncle, her father's younger brother, wrote about establishing a cattle ranch in Texas, everything changed. The letter spoke of opportunity, of land waiting to be cultivated, of a life far removed from Boston's constraining social circles. Against her mother's wishes, Elizabeth convinced her family to let her accompany her brother Thomas, who would help manage the ranch. The journey had been arduous. Weeks of travel by train and wagon, crossing landscapes that transformed from familiar eastern forests to endless prairie. Each mile took her further from the life that had been planned for her, and closer to a world she'd only imagined in her most private dreams. Samuel Reynolds wasn't from Texas either, though one would never guess it from watching him work. Born in Kentucky to a farming family, he had learned early about hard work, respect for the land, and the value of quiet perseverance. His father, a stern but fair man, had taught him that a person's worth was measured not by words, but by actions. At 18, Samuel had left home, drawn by stories of opportunity in the West. He'd worked cattle drives in Missouri, learned from seasoned cowboys, and gradually built a reputation as a skilled and reliable ranch hand. Where other men boasted and postured, Samuel let his work speak for itself. The first hints of dust appeared on the horizon around midday. Elizabeth's heart quickened, though she told herself it was merely anticipation for her brother's safe return. She smoothed her simple cotton dress, pale blue with tiny white flowers, and tried to appear casual as the sound of hooves and lowing cattle grew closer. Thomas rode in front, his hat pulled low against the sun. Behind him, the other ranch hands guided the massive herd. And there, riding slightly apart but still connected to the group, was Samuel. He sat tall in the saddle, his movements fluid and controlled. A faded blue bandana was tied around his neck, protecting him from the dust. His leather chaps were worn but meticulously maintained, speaking to a man who respected his tools and equipment. When their eyes met across the distance, something unexpectedly tender passed between them. Not a smile, not a wave, just a moment of pure, unguarded recognition. The cattle drive arrived, kicking up clouds of golden dust. Men dismounted, stretching muscles stiff from days of riding. Thomas embraced their father, regaling him with stories of the journey. But Elizabeth's attention remained fixed on Samuel. He didn't seek attention. While the other men celebrated their successful drive with loud stories and hearty laughter, Samuel systematically unsaddled his horse, brushed her down, and ensured she was watered and fed. Elizabeth watched, fascinated by his quiet dedication. Her father noticed her watching. "Samuel's one of our best hands," he commented, joining her. "Been with us 3 seasons now. Quiet man, but worth his weight in gold." Elizabeth nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Her mind wandered to the countless stories she'd heard about ranch life, the challenges, the beauty, the raw authenticity of survival in this unforgiving landscape. That evening, a celebration meal was prepared. Roasted beef, fresh bread, preserves, and a peach cobbler her mother had baked that morning. The ranch hands sat around the large wooden table, trading stories and jokes. Samuel sat at the far end, speaking little but listening intently. When he did speak, his voice was deep and measured, with a hint of a Texas drawl that seemed to curl around each word. As autumn deepened, Samuel began to seek Elizabeth out in subtle ways. Not with grand gestures, but with small, meaningful interactions. He'd arrive slightly earlier to morning work, knowing she sometimes brought coffee and fresh bread to the ranch hands. His gaze would find her, not with bold intensity, but with a quiet, steady warmth that made her feel simultaneously seen and respected. One crisp October morning, after a particularly challenging cattle drive, Samuel approached where Elizabeth was hanging laundry. His movements were weary but controlled, dust coating his clothing, his bandana pulled down around his neck. "Might I help?" he asked, and it wasn't a performative offer. His hands were already reaching for a pin sheet, ready to assist. As they worked side by side, threading needles and carefully stitching torn fabric, something unexpected emerged. Samuel's fingers, rough from years of ranch work, moved with surprising gentleness. When their hands occasionally brushed while passing the needle, Elizabeth felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the afternoon heat. He seemed aware of the contact but didn't pull away. Instead, he'd pause momentarily, a breath, a heartbeat, before continuing his careful mending. "Your stitching is precise," Samuel commented, his voice low. Not a compliment meant to flatter, but an observation offered with genuine respect. Elizabeth's response was equally measured. "My mother insisted all ladies know how to repair what they value." Their eyes met, and something passed between them. Not just a look, but a mutual understanding. Two people who recognized the value of careful maintenance, whether of clothing, of land, or of something more fragile and indefinable. The ranch existed in a delicate balance with the natural world. Droughts could destroy months of hard work. A single storm could wash away carefully planted crops. The cowboys weren't just laborers, they were guardians, protecting both the land and the life it sustained. As winter approached, the landscape began to change. The vibrant greens of summer transformed into rich browns and russets. Harvesting became the primary focus. Corn was gathered, hay was stored, preparations made for the coming winter. Samuel's role became even more critical during these months. His knowledge of animal husbandry, his understanding of the land's rhythms, proved invaluable. He could predict weather patterns, knew exactly when to move cattle to different grazing areas, understood which pastures needed rest. By late winter, their connection had become something both families recognized. Not a passionate, tumultuous love, but a partnership built on mutual understanding. Samuel didn't court Elizabeth with flowery words or expensive gifts. His courtship was practical, profound, offering help during difficult ranch tasks, showing her he saw her as an equal. When he finally spoke to her father about marriage, it wasn't a negotiation, but a conversation between men who understood the value of commitment. "I can provide," Samuel said simply, "not just with money but with dedication, to the ranch, to family." Her father recognized something in Samuel that went beyond traditional courtship, a man who understood that love was a daily practice of respect, support, and shared labor. Elizabeth's decision wasn't a romantic surrender, but a considered choice. Samuel represented a life of genuine purpose, a partnership where her intelligence and capability would be valued, not merely tolerated. Their first kiss happened unexpectedly, not on a moonlit night, but during a practical moment. A sudden spring storm had rolled in quickly. As they worked together securing equipment, lightning crackling nearby, Samuel's hand found hers. Their eyes met, and in that moment of shared purpose, of mutual protection against the raw power of nature, something tender and true passed between them. It wasn't a kiss of passionate drama, but of profound connection. A promise of something deeper than romance, a true partnership. Love, they were learning, wasn't about grand declarations. It was about finding someone who understood you, who saw your strengths and respected your spirit, who would stand beside you, not just in moments of beauty, but in the challenging, mundane moments that truly defined a life. As snow began to dust the distant mountains and the ranch prepared for the long winter months, Elizabeth realized she had found something more precious than any life planned for her in Boston. She had found a home. Not just a place, but a feeling. A sense of belonging that ran as deep as the Texas soil itself. And on the vast, beautiful Texas prairie, under skies that held both storm and sunlight, their love took root, quiet, strong, and wonderfully authentically true.